The solder actually penetrates into the pores of the metal to be soldered. This embedding of the solder into the surface of the metal leads is called wetting. Good wetting is indicated by the solder feathering out to a thin edge. This is an example of good wetting. Notice the solder feathers out to a thin edge. It's the wetting process that actually provides the physical strength and makes the good electrical connection. Here's another example of good wetting. The ability to wet the leads with solder is the secret of good soldering. The solder used in electronics is a mixture of tin and lead. Both tin and lead melt at temperatures much lower than most other metals. So the applied heat melts the solder but not the lead. That's why solder can be used to join metal leads and wires so conveniently. The tin and lead can be mixed in different proportions to make solders with different characteristics. For example, this is 40-60 solder. It's a mixture of 40% tin and 60% lead. This is 60-40 solder, the most commonly used type of solder in electronics. It's a mixture of 60% tin and 40% lead. Solder is normally solid, but becomes soft or pasty when you apply enough heat. As more heat is applied, it melts and becomes a liquid. The proportions of tin and lead determines the solder's melting temperature. For example, 60-40 solder has a lower melting temperature than 40-60 solder. This means you would not have to heat the connection as much to melt 60-40 solder, thereby reducing the chance of damaging a delicate component or printed circuit board. Another advantage of 60-40 solder is that it has a narrow temperature range where it's soft. Because 60-40 solder quickly changes from a liquid to a solid, there's less chance for lead movement to occur while the solder is soft, causing a poor connection. A low melting temperature and a narrow soft range are two reasons why 60-40 solder is the most commonly used grade of solder for electronic work. 63-37 solder is even a bit better, but more expensive. It has a slightly lower melting temperature and changes from solid to liquid without going through a soft state. So the two best tin-lead ratios for regular soldering are 60-40 and 63-37. To make a good solder connection, the wires and leads must be clean. This looks like a clean connection, but because it's exposed to the air, an invisible insulating oxide layer has formed on the metal surface. The solder will not flow and stick to the wires unless the oxide is removed. Removing the invisible oxide layer is the job of a chemical substance called flux. Most solder used in electronics is actually a type of miniature tubing that contains the flux built into it. The flux automatically removes any oxide from the metal to be soldered as you apply the solder to the heated connection. The two most common types of flux are rosin and acid. Acid core solder should never be used for soldering electronic connections because it is highly corrosive. Acid core solder is used primarily in sheet metal work. Only rosin core solder should be used in electronic soldering. Rosin core solder is available in several diameters.